Algo me dice que no puedo iniciar mi video porque el hospedador lo
Sí,
detuvo.
sí, un segundo. A ver, vamos a volver a abrir. Un segundo. Just give me a couple seconds so we can start. And I have no idea why that happened. Mhm. Ok, a ver, trata de prender el video.
Listo.
Okay, just give me one more second. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank all of you who've been joining us throughout the years. We've been doing this show every weekend since 2004. So we are going on 20 years broadcasting Living in Mexico every weekend through Grupo Imagen. So thank you so much. And I believe this is my fourth election that I've covered, that we've had the opportunity to, or third, that we've had the opportunity to analyze in this show. And I think this is the fourth presidential transition that I've been participating in, or at least having the opportunity to report, to analyze, and to inform. So once again, thank you so much. And this is it. The countdown is starting, and it's going to be an extraordinary month for Mexico. Um, if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, a very well-known economist, someone who's been joining us throughout the years, Gabriel Casillas, told us that September was going to be, he called it Septiembre Negro, dark September, Black September. It depends on how you want to translate it. But he told us on the show that September was going to be a very difficult month for Mexico. And of course, he was looking at this, at the different events that were taking place a couple weeks ago, in which about a month, President Manuel Lopez Obrador and his team insisted that the judicial reform was going to pass, and that the other 17 reforms that President Manuel Lopez Obrador had proposed in February would also pass, as the new legislature would be sworn in on September 1st. So the debate on these different reforms are taking place as we speak. The bills, or at least the draft bills, some of them have been approved, and we're going to talk about that right now. But I think there's still a lot of disbelief that all of this was going to happen, in addition to, of course, other events that I'm sure President Manuel Lopez Obrador couldn't control, was the arrest of El Mayo Zambada and the way he was taken to the United States, which we can also try to understand if this is creating more frictions with the U.S. government. But to help us understand what these next 30 days are going to look like, I always appreciate today's guest when he joins us, Carlos Ramirez, from this very interesting group, Integralia, that provides very, very good analysis, political analysis, and economic analysis. And it's always great to have you on the show, Carlos. Thank you so much for joining us, especially right now, this weekend, in which we are about to, there's a countdown. The new administration, she will be sworn in, the new president of Mexico will be sworn in, Claudia Sheinbaum, on October 1st. We basically have a month left before this happens. And in this month, Mexico could take a dramatic change in terms of how this democracy, or what we call democracy, functions. So welcome to the show. And let's just start with with the fact that finally the tribunal and the Federal Electoral Institute blessed the not only the results of the election, but more importantly, blessed the number of seats that each party would have in the Mexican Senate and the Mexican lower house. I think there had been some expectation that this would not happen, but just put into context to our audience what happened this week in that regard. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ana Maria, for having me again. And very glad to be with you. And particularly at this moment in Mexico's political history, it's going to be a very important month for Mexico in September. So basically what the Electoral Tribunal finally declared this week is that Morena, in a nutshell, Morena will have a constitutional majority in the lower chamber and will be very, very, very close to a constitutional majority in the Senate. So in essence, I mean, Morena will have absolute control of the two chambers and the possibility of materially changing entirely the Constitution of Mexico. So yes, I mean, obviously there was a lot of debate before this event happened this week about how the allocation of seats in both chambers is done, and if really Morena had won with such a big difference. Actually, Morena in the lower chamber basically earned 54-55% of the vote and is having 75 of the seats. So it's a 20 percentage points more than what really they received. But this is, I mean, this is right now is no longer a significant discussion because the decision has already been made. There were old rules that benefit the Morena, and at the end of the day, that's what the tribunal decided. So yes, Morena will be able to redesign, reshape entirely the Constitution.
Let me ask you this. Could you please put into context for our audience, when was the last time in Mexico that one party had so much power or one president had so much power?
Yeah. Mexican political history is quite clear in its different stages, right? So we had the PRI with an hegemonic power since its formation in 1929 until the year 1997. From there to 1997, the PRI basically had entire control of the elections, entire control of the Electoral Institute. So they were able to always win with a very big majority, not always with a very clean way of organizing elections. So basically, from 1997 to 2024, Mexico transitioned to democracy, multi-party democracy started in the country, and for those 27 years, Mexico had a relatively balanced political system with counterbalances and a multi-party system in which basically no party had a constitutional majority. Well, we are going back, Ana Maria, to the old ways in Mexican politics. And that's why what voters at the end of the day decided in some way or another. We could debate about the overrepresentation, but at the end of the day, voters decided to give and to grant Morena a very significant majority. And yeah, we are going back to the times of the 80s and 90s of the PRI.
Where let's now we know that basically President, not only outgoing President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador will be able to control the reforms that are being discussed right now at the end of his administration, but also it's clear that Claudia Sheinbaum is going to be able to pass any constitutional reform that she believes needs to be implemented, and she probably is going to do it at the beginning of her administration. So let's talk about these reforms. There is, of course, the judicial reform that not only has been debated, but pretty much there's a bill waiting to be approved when the new legislature is sworn in next week. Let's talk about that reform, and then we can talk about the other 17.
Absolutely. A bit of context. Lopez Obrador won in a landslide election in 2018, but was unable to win a constitutional majority, particularly in the Senate. Actually, in the lower chamber, he controlled the lower chamber with a constitutional majority, but he was never able to do significant reforms, constitutional reforms, because basically he didn't have the numbers. After 2021, actually, he lost the lower chamber, at least from a constitutional perspective. And several of the bills he proposed in Congress were either blocked or were basically brought down by the Supreme Court in Mexico, because basically were declared unconstitutional. So the dream of Lopez Obrador was always, since day one, to redo a new constitution, but was unable to do it because he didn't have the numbers. That's why on February 5th, 2024, he presented 18 constitutional reforms and basically explained to voters that he was going to propose that, not in the idea of having those implemented and approved in February, but basically to show voters that he needed a constitutional majority in order to redesign the Constitution. And that's what he got. We can discuss for hours how he did it, by good ways and by bad ways, but at the end of the day, he got it. So now we're in a situation very unusual, and definitely something we haven't seen, we've never seen in Mexico's political history. We have an outgoing president that is about to leave office. Usually, outgoing presidents do not try to approve bills in the last month of their administration. What they do is basically they say to the new president, hey, new president, why don't you try to move your own policy decisions, and I will simply dilute, and you are the decision maker. Not Lopez Obrador. Lopez Obrador, with this dream of reshaping the Constitution, now has the opportunity in the last month of his administration to do what he always wanted to do. And now Claudia Sheinbaum, which is 1 month away from becoming the new president, is in some way or another, although not entirely caught, because she actually approves most of the 18, and I would say almost all, and probably all the constitutional reforms proposed by Lopez Obrador. She's caught in this very awkward situation in which Lopez Obrador wants to approve bills at the end, but at the end of the time, that is having a toll and consequences for the start of her administration. So going back to your question, that's context. Yes, judicial reform. That bill is gonna be approved in September, no matter what happens, because this is the most significant bill out of the 18 proposed by Lopez Obrador, because basically Lopez Obrador thinks, and he always expressed this, but I think some people didn't hear enough of him. He always expressed that the judicial system in Mexico, in his view, was corrupted, and that basically became an obstacle for his transformation movement. Others, I think the majority of people, of experts in Mexico, think that he is doing this basically to erode the counterbalance that the judicial sector represents in the country. So that's where we are. But there's no question, Ana Maria, that this bill will be approved in September.
Joining us today is Carlos Ramirez from Integralia. I want to thank all of you who are joining us via YouTube Live, but also as we stream live, but also through Grupo Imagen Radio FM, not only in Mexico City but around the country. So thank you once again for joining us. This is the question is. There has been a lot of pressure before we go into the other bills, but there has been very strong reactions, not only within Mexico, but also from other countries, including Canada, the United States, the European Union. I mean, there, all kinds of NGOs, business communities, organizations, stating that this reform is a bad idea. I mean, there's other parts of the reforms being proposed and being discussed in September that also concerns particularly the members of the USMCA. But this judicial reform, the idea that judges are going to be elected, has created a lot of anxiety, I would say. Do you think that has been sufficient pressure? Do you think there's going to be any changes or potential changes in the discussion? Do you think they would postpone the approval of this bill?
No. Short answer, no. So we've seen during the past weeks an enormous, and I would say unprecedented amount of reactions coming from everywhere. Investment banks, governments from the US and Canada, different international institutions and UN, Human Rights Watch. We've seen reactions coming from all business associations, both national and Canadian and the US business community in the US and in Mexico. All of them have, and certainly many newsletters in the US, and other parts of the world, The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, all of them have stated that this reform is highly dangerous for Mexico's rule of law. But that, Ana Maria, is not going to change a dime. The decision that has already been taken that this bill will be approved. And why? It's important to understand why. Because for Lopez Obrador, he has really not much to lose, really. He's leaving in a couple of weeks, and he thinks that he will be remembered as the great transformer, and he will be in the
or the great destroyer, the great transformer, or the great destroyer. Yeah, yes, I mean that's the risk of all these reforms, right?
Of course, but in his belief, he is gonna be remembered as as one of the greatest presidents of Mexico's history, in his view. So he doesn't really care too much. Really, who has more to lose is clearly Claudia Sheinbaum. But in Claudia Sheinbaum's view, she believes that Mexico has so much to offer the world, so much opportunities, that her government is going to be much more pragmatic, technocratic, that she has a great program in infrastructure, in energy, that she's going to be able, once she assumes power after October 1st, to calm down investors, to basically offer them a lot of good opportunities, and that is going to be enough. That's why Sheinbaum is not worried. I mean, I think in probably in private, she's becoming a little bit more worried. But at the end of the day, she has decided that this bill is going to help her to accumulate more power, to basically take out the obstacles for her program, and she will be able, without those obstacles, to reshape Mexico's economy. That's her view. I think that view is wrong, but that is what she believes is going to happen after October 1st.
So, and this is, I'm going to ask the question right now, but I think we should wait and analyze and just wait to see what happens. I mean, there's going to be a point where these reforms are going to have an extraordinary impact on Mexico's economy, Mexico's finance, Mexico's governance. We haven't even talked about the how these decisions being made are going to impact the criminal justice system, the fact that they want to approve faceless judges. I want to leave all that analysis aside, assuming that once it's approved, we're going to have to follow very closely the impact of these reforms. But is there, and this also has to do with the other reforms that have to do with the autonomous agencies that are very important also for the checks and balances that all democracies need, in addition to the justice system. What is going to happen with the autonomous, the other reforms that are being, not only the autonomous institutions, but also the other reforms that are being debated in September? Do you think there's going to be a slowdown, or are they actually going to try to approve all of these reforms?
That, I think, is the question, Ana Maria, right now, because the judicial reform in itself is highly controversial and very likely to be very disruptive, okay, by itself. And that by itself is causing this mess and these reactions from everywhere. But if you add to that the other bills that are also, some of them, highly controversial, and I would say highly dangerous, the one that has to do with energy, the one that has to do with mining, the one that has to do with the disappearance of the regulators in telecommunications, in energy, in competition. If you add to the judicial reform all that, that is going to be a big mess, I would say. So it's going to exacerbate enormously the view about Mexico, and it's going to create a very difficult environment for Claudia Sheinbaum. So is this going to happen or not? I would love to say to you yes or no, because in that sense, we could prepare ourselves. But at this stage, the signs that Lopez Obrador has sent, and actually Sheinbaum, has been very ambiguous. They haven't said no, they haven't said yes. My sense is that they are preparing a blitzit, a tsunami of reforms for the second part of September, and that they will try to approve most of the 17 reforms of Lopez Obrador. But that's my sense. Obviously, at the end of the day, Sheinbaum could intervene and finally slow down Lopez Obrador and say, hey, okay, we are causing a lot of noise with the judicial reform. Let's slow down a bit. I'm going to have 6 years. I can do whatever I want. Right. Let me do it by myself with a little bit, with a little bit less.
But, I think Andres Manuel does not trust that that President-elect Claudia Sheinbaum is going to have the backbone to pass all of these reforms if when she becomes president, simply because of the amount of both international pressure, and of course we have the negotiation of the UMCA in 2026, but also internal, within Mexico, there is a certain level of pressure that she may have to attend to, although she may not want to. So could you just rapidly, because we're running out of time, just remind us what are the other reforms that you're talking about, which has to do with mining and energy?
Yeah. Well, obviously the autonomous institutions are clear, right? It basically is transferring this institution powers and responsibilities to ministers. So, for example, the Competition Commission that has been for 30 years, Ana Maria, 30 years, basically trying to confront monopolies in the country, is going to be transferred to the Ministry of Economy. The energy regulators is to the Ministry of Energy. The Transparency Institute to the Ministry of Secretaría de Función Pública. So the other two are highly dangerous, because the one in electricity, what it tries to do is basically bring back the energy model Mexico had in 1980. in which basically Pemex and CFE had all the power. They were big monopolies. They didn't have to compete. They didn't have to become productive. And basically what they are trying to do is grant them all the power. So clearly this will leave private sector companies in enormous disadvantage. The one in mining is basically vetoing all mining activity in open air for the future, which already the Mining Industry Association has expressed that if this happened, Mexico will lose billions of dollars in investment. So I think they are also highly dangerous, potentially, and one thing more, the mining one is particularly sensitive for Canada because Canadian mining companies are big in Mexico. They are probably the biggest players in the country. So obviously, if you move on with that reform, you're going to cause enormous disruption with the Canadian and obviously with the US and in the rest of it.
Well, we unfortunately ran out of time, and I have about 20 other questions. So hopefully you will come back very, very soon. And of course, we still have 3 more weeks before she is sworn in as the first woman president in Mexico, which nobody is talking about anymore, really. And of course, we're going to be watching very closely these the debates, the very little debate that's taking place, and the approval of these bills, and to just watch very closely to see if there's any changes. Carlos Ramirez from Integralia, you got to, I don't know how much, or I don't even know how to express my appreciation that you're joining us and that you've been joining us throughout the years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Always.
Thank
you.
Thank you. We're going to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're watching and listening, living in Mexico. Please don't go away. I'll be right back.